today, this week in your fundamentals in art, I believe you're going over value, which is between light and dark, and uh, dealing with the shades in between and uh, that kind of thing. So I was thinking about that in terms of our uh, elements of comedy, and we uh, can focus on opposites in a different way, comic opposites. So we'll first talk about character opposites and comic duos, and then we will, at the end, we'll talk a little bit about um, different sort of like story ideas that involve opposites. So um, that's what we're going to be working on today. I'm going to just very quickly adjust my light because it looks like it is about to fall, and I don't want it to do that in the middle of class. There we go. All right, so first we're going to be talking about comedy duos. We've seen a lot of comedy duos in some of the things that we've done so far. But have I told in this class, in this incarnation of the class, have I told you all the story of the two guys selling cabbages in the marketplace? Okay, so you remember those. That's Commedia dell'arte. That's how that got started, and there were two characters in Commedia dell'arte that were very popular. The first one was this character named Zani, and the reason he was called that is because in Italian, the name Gianni is the Italian name of you call Johnny. And in Italian, if you don't know someone's name, you just call them Johnny. So it's similar to how we would say Mac or Buddy, or something like that. Hey, Buddy. Hey, Buddy. Hey, Mac. Hey, get over here. And so, because they were servants, they were lower class characters. People wouldn't necessarily know their names. They'd say, "Hey, Johnny. Hey, Johnny, come over here. I need your hand with this." And so, Johnny became evolved into Zani. And so he was the first servant character, Zani. And it's also where because he was a really broad, funny character, it's also how we get our English word zany. So all of the servant characters were called Zani. So he was the first, Zani was the first servant character clown that got popular, and then all of the other servant clown characters became known as the Zanis. So Zani, just to give you a little bit about him, he was very slow, and I mean that in all ways. He was kind of dopey, and he wasn't very quick on the uptake, and he was always missing the point of what was trying to be told to him. So he was kind of dim, not very bright, but he also moved very slow as well. And his opposite in terms of servant characters, and they often got paired up together, would be Arlecchino. Arlecchino was very quick. He was also kind of dumb, because all the clown characters are kind of dumb, but he was always very quick. He was always coming up with a plan. He always had a crafty plan that would end up usually going wrong or turning around on him. But they always ended up getting teamed up together. They would always end up working together on stuff. And Arlecchino would kind of boss Zani around, and Zani would just kind of follow and do whatever was told of him, because even though this guy was kind of dumb too, he was very slightly less dumb than him. So he automatically became the boss, and then Zani would follow him around, and they would get into schemes and based on Arlecchino's plans for things, and eventually they would usually wind up getting in some sort of tight spot, or having the plan backfire. These masks, they're from a company called Strange Face. There are lots of places where you can get these style of masks. These ones Actual Commedia dell'arte masks are usually made out of leather. And I do have a leather one in the other room. If we have time at the end, I'll go grab it and show it to you. But they're usually made out of leather, but these are made out of hard neoprene, so that they're better for using in classes like this, because lots of different people using them. We can wipe them down with alcohol very easily, and they get knocked around a bit, so they hold up a little bit better. But these are from a company called Strange Face, and they're really good. They have lots of really well designed masks at Strange Face. So Arlecchino and Zani became really our first model for this idea of a comic duo. One person who's kind of slightly less dumb, who becomes the boss and bosses the other person around, who follows them around sort of blindly, and they're always getting into scrapes. And that becomes, in later performances, when we get into things like circus and theater performances and things like that, those become known as the red clown and the white clown. And I want to share this with you real quick. So they're called the red clown and the white clown because literally that's what they wear. So you have the white clown, which dresses in all white. They're the more Arlecchino style character, usually the one in charge, usually the one getting one over on the other character. And then there's the red clown, who usually has more baggy clothes. Their clothes aren't as fancy. They're the more dim-witted one. They're the ones that often wear the red nose and the heavier makeup. The white clown usually just has a white face with the eyebrows painted on, similar to what a lot of people would say is like a pantomime character. But that comic duo, that you see that comic duo of Arlecchino and Zani sort of shift into the red clown and white clown. Now, I do want to say that in this class today, I'm going to be using the word clown a lot, and I do think I think I've said this before, but it's important to note every once in a while, because in America the word clown has a very narrow definition. When you say the word clown in America, in the United States, people generally think of like a circus clown or a character that you'd see at a birthday party, you know, with the makeup and the baggy shoes, or the baggy pants and the big shoes and all that. So that's one very specific part of clowning, and there are lots of different types of clowns. So it's kind of like if someone said they were talking about art, and you were only thinking about watercolor. Like if your definition of art was just watercolor, and you go, no, you can be a sculptor, you can paint in acrylics, you can do graphic design. Like there's so many different things that fall under the word art. You wouldn't want to limit it to just something as narrow as watercolor. That's kind of what I mean when I say that this idea of clown, there's so many different versions of it that we don't want to narrow it to just that one idea of what we might see at a circus. So this red clown and white clown is our sort of prototypical comic duo. You have, they generally have opposing personalities. And there's the one that's a little smarter and usually is the boss, and usually things go their way more. And then you have the red clown, who usually the joke ends up being on them, and they end up having something bad happen to them, usually because of a mistake in the plan of the white clown. So if we look at, say, like last week, we looked at Abbott and Costello. You remember the who's on first routine? So if you have Abbott, who is the person who knows the names of the players on the baseball team, and you have Costello, who's the guy who's trying to figure it out and can't quite get it. Abbott is the first guy, and Costello is the second guy. So who do you think is the white clown in that group? You can either type it or say it. That's right, Abbott. Abbott is the white clown. Costello is the red clown. So how about if we look at Bugs and Daffy? Bugs and Daffy always end up being a comic duo together. Who's the white clown and who's the red clown in that? It was, well, let's say who's the red clown in the Bugs and Daffy duo? Yeah, very good, Leon Heather Rose. Excellent. And what about Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner? Another classic duo. Yep, Wile E. Coyote is red. Roadrunner is the white clown, and you see the same duo throughout all kinds of stuff. You can see, SpongeBob and Patrick are the white clown and the red clown. You have Michael Scott and Dwight Schrute on The Office are white clown and red clown. If you know that show, if you've ever seen the show Gilligan's Island, the Skipper and Gilligan are the white clown and the red clown. So this is a common thing throughout all of comedy and comedy storytelling, is this idea of this comic duo that represent kind of opposites a little bit. I want to dive in just a little bit, give you a little bit of history of that, because I think it's interesting. So the white clown, if we look at Zani and the servant characters, there's one servant character from Commedia that was very, very popular, named Pierrot. And Pierrot dressed in, as you might guess, all white, and had a white mask and a white hat, white costume, so it was kind of baggy, and was one of the most popular Commedia servant characters. This character, so Commedia started in Italy, but then spread all over Europe. And this character became really popular in France. It became really popular in Germany. And this character kind of really became the star character of Commedia. And eventually, so in that picture, you saw that Pierrot had a mask, but eventually they stopped using the mask and they just started painting the face white. And so you may have seen that before. I'll try to pull some of those up real quick just so that we can take a look at it. If we look at Pierrot images. So this is a classic image of a clown. I'm sure that you have seen this before. I'll just show this Google image search page. White painted face, white costume, usually has the rough point, sometimes a pointed hat, but the white face, lined eyes, painted on eyebrows. You know, there's a David Bowie as Pierrot. I think there's Lady Gaga as Pierrot in one thing. Yeah, so that's a classic and character. And so that came up through the Italian Renaissance in the 1500s, all the way up through even today. You see white clowns in the circus. One of the most famous white clowns was a character called, was a performer called Joseph Grimaldi. And sometimes the white clown might be referred to as a Joey because of Joseph Grimaldi. And there's a church in London that every year all the clowns from all of England go and have a church service just for clowns, and that's called the Grimaldi service every year. In America, our most famous clown was this guy. Oh, there he is. Named George Fox. George Fox was really the first entertainment celebrity in the United States. He was a performer in vaudeville, and he would travel all over the country in the 1800s, and people would come from all over to see him perform. He had this one-person show where he would just get into these comic routines. He had a famous routine where he played Humpty Dumpty, and it was he was the highest paid entertainer ever at the time, and he was a celebrity. He was one of the first entertainment celebrities. So that's our white clown, and just to give you an idea of what a white clown performance is like, I want to show you a little video here. This is a performer, actually someone that I know, named David Shiner. He was one of the very first clowns with Cirque du Soleil, and he was a street performer in France, and he has this routine where he gets people up from the audience to be the characters in a silent movie, and he kind of bosses them around. So this is that idea of the white clown always having a plan, always having a scheme, being kind of the boss and bossing people around, and being the sort of like take charge, craftier version of the clown. Now, you will notice that he doesn't have a white costume. That we've kind of gotten away from that part of having the white clown, but he does have the whitened face a little bit. But I think you'll like this video. It's pretty fun. Here we go. Let me optimize for video. I'll stop it there. So you can watch that full routine on YouTube if you want to. But basically, he gets them to act out this whole silent movie, and but you get the idea of the attitude of like very high status person. I can do no wrong. I'm in charge, even though I'm kind of a bozo. So that's the white clown. The red clown is so the story that goes behind the red clown is there was an acrobat in a circus, and his name was Tom Belling. He was in a German circus, and he was always missing his cues, and so he got in trouble with the boss of the circus, and it was backstage, and he was wearing these big baggy clothes to make fun of the boss. He was like making fun of the boss and being like, "Oh, look at me, I'm telling everybody what to do." And little did he know, the boss came in and was standing right behind him. And when he realized what was going on, he ran out into the circus ring, and as he was running, he was looking behind him and didn't see what's happening, and he fell over the side of the circus ring and fell flat on his face, and the audience started laughing. And so then he got up and didn't realize what was going on, and fell over again, and fell over the side of the circus ring again, and that just kept happening. He kept trying to get up, and he would end up and get out of there, and he kept falling over, and the crowd would yell "August, August," which is the German word for fool. And so the red clown, whereas sometimes we call the white clown Joey, the red clown we call August as well. So there's the white clown and the August clown, the red clown, the white clown, the Joey clown, August. So those are just two names for the same thing. But August clown is the one that is always having a tough time of things. They just can't figure it out. They're not in charge. Everything is always happening to them, and they just have to deal with it. And I think this clip is the prime example. Some of you might have even seen this clip before. It's pretty well known. But I think you'll like it. So again, always having a hard time of things, the August, and that clown is Lucille Ball. That shows I Love Lucy. Some of you might know that show. Yeah, so that just gives you a little bit of idea of these comic opposites, these two comic figures that show up over and over and over and over. And Nathaniel, you're actually on the right track. We will be doing something like that very soon. So right now, the activity that I want us to do is to create create our own comic duos. So you will create your own comic duo, and then eventually we are going to draw them. So right now you're just going to create a comic duo of opposites, and the way you'll do that is I want you to just write down, and I'll put this in the chat, an adjective, and then a job, and then the opposite of that adjective, and then something that would be opposed to that job. So the example that I came up with was if you have a friendly IT guy and a grumpy technophobe. If you put those two in a scene or a situation together, that we could get some of that comic opposite stuff. So if you want to do something other than a job, it can be, I don't know. I'm trying to think. If you look at something like Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, their jobs aren't opposing, but their goals are opposing. So if you come up with something where someone has a certain goal, I said job because when you have a job, you have a job to do. But if you can come up with something that's a goal, like even Bugs and Daffy in that one show that we watched, the Showbiz Bugs cartoon, they're both entertainers, but Bugs is just there to entertain, have a good time, and Daffy's goal is all about accolades and I want them to love me and that kind of thing. So they have kind of opposing goals in that way, even though their quote unquote jobs are the same. So yeah, so that's the assignment. So everybody, where you are, just brainstorm a little bit and take a couple of minutes and come up with your duo, and then we'll, after everybody comes up with theirs, as you come up with yours, you can either put it in the chat or you can raise your hand and say what you came up with. And then, as I said, we're going to come up with excellent, Tater. I like that. Trying to find the next thing I want to show you. There we go. Okay, so as you come up with your characters, and please, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you after this. I want to share a Chuck Jones cartoon with you. I always try to, or I like to try to include a Chuck Jones cartoon with all of this stuff. For one thing, because they are very good and very entertaining. But also, I think it's worth noting that one of the reasons that this class is a part of the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity is that Chuck Jones used a lot of this stuff in his work. All of these sort of comic elements and clown principles and comedy techniques are evident throughout Chuck Jones's work. So I think it's really cool to spot this stuff in his work when we can, as we're talking about it. So the idea of a comic duo, I don't think is any more beautifully expressed than in this cartoon. because in this cartoon, you have two characters that aren't even really characters. This idea of a comic duo and comic opposites is so ingrained in us. We so universally understand what that relationship is. We have two characters that aren't even really characters, and you'll see what I mean by that in just a second. But as you keep working and as you keep coming up with your own comic opposites, I want you to take a look at this cartoon and notice the comic opposites of this cartoon. So as you can see, as I was saying before, they're really barely even characters in the sense of the character design. You know, they're not Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. It's literally just a dot, a line, and a squiggle, and yet because we understand that idea of that comic duo relationship, we can see that relationship with the relationship between the line and the squiggle and the dot and the line. We can read that relationship onto even something as simple as those two characters. So did anybody else come up with any comic duo characters that they want to share?
I'd like to share a little storyboard I made.
Or sure.
Let me just turn off my filter. So I made a long comedic storyboard, which I own, and it's trying to get a bell to work. So my character's trying to get the bell to ring, but the string won't budge, and he keeps trying and trying, and it keeps pulling on it, and he's starting to get frustrated, and then soon he hears the ring, and then he did it, and then in a shocking twist, he looks up, and then the bell just goes on him and just squishes him.
Oh no, that's very fun. Thank you. Lilian and Heather Rose, Inkwell and Maya. Am I saying that right? What are they like?
Can I just put it in the chat?
Sure. While they're doing that, I want to talk about one last thing. Running out of time. But I want to talk about one last thing before we go in terms of comic opposites. And so we've been talking about the idea of characters being comic opposites or being a comic duo, but the story can be comic in its juxtaposition as well. So what we call that is a clash of context. So if you have a character that is in a situation that is unfamiliar or that they don't belong in, so that could be something like an alien on a new planet. If you've ever seen the cartoon Invader Zim or E.T. or there's an old sitcom called Third Rock from the Sun, where you have aliens who are who are understanding and learning the idea of what it is to be human, what it is to be on Earth, or what Earth is like from the context of being not from this planet. So that's one type of clash of context. You can have a rags to riches thing or a riches to rags story where you have a character who is poor, but is suddenly in a world where they're dealing with like wealth and all of the trappings that come along with wealth, Prince and the Pauper or something like that. And then conversely, you have riches to rags, where you have characters who were rich and now suddenly have to deal with not having any money. Their money gets taken away from them. They suddenly have to deal with being regular people all of a sudden. So that can be a clash of context as well. And let's see what else. There's the country mouse and the city mouse, where you have a person who's used to things being rural and sort of small town, and suddenly they're in the big city and having to deal with that. And then conversely, someone who's used to the trappings of the big city and then having to go and be in the country or in a rural setting. So like with the first example, if you've ever seen a show called The Beverly Hillbillies, that's a good example of that kind of clash of context. And Green Acres, if you've ever seen, there's a show called Green Acres, that's another example of that as well, where you have rich people that suddenly find themselves out on a farm. So all of these different things are ways, there's a whole list of them. If you go online, if you type in clash of context story, there's probably 2 or 3 dozen of the different versions of that clash of context. But it's basically the idea of putting a character or some characters in a situation that they are unfamiliar with, and that clash of context is where you get what we talked about last week, the comic premise of them having to deal with the conflict or overcoming the obstacles there. So let's look at Heather Rose and Liliana's thing. Inkwell's sort of a paranoid and clumsy, Maya super perfect, and they're good friends. Inkwell has a crush on Maya, but Maya doesn't know or care. Well, that's fun. I like that. That's a good duo. So I wanted to share this with you just because I stumbled across it the other day, and I said, oh, well, I'm going to be talking about comic duos and clash of context in class next week, so I might as well share this with them. So several years ago, I would say about 10 years ago, I had a show that I was pitching that was in development, and it never got made. It never went to pilot or anything. But I was pitching it, and it was in development for a long time. Development is when you're working with a studio or a network, and they're sort of fleshing out the details of what the story would be, who would work on it, all of that kind of stuff. And a lot of times in the entertainment industry, something is in development for a long time and then nothing ever happens with it. That's there are way more things that go into development than get made. But this was a project that I had that was in development for quite a while. And I thought I would share it with you because it's very much related to what we're talking about. So these are characters called Hector and Herbie. And this was the idea was that it was a jungle cartoon, and these two characters are characters that were raised in captivity, born and raised in captivity, and were in a zoo for a while. And the zoo that they were in closed down, and so they got released back into the wild. What is that program called when they I can't remember what it's called, but when an animal has been in captivity, they can return them to the wild through this program. I can't remember the name of it, but so they do that. But Hector and Herbie don't like the idea of that. They don't want to be in the wild. They have gotten used to the human comforts, and so they have to deal with being jungle animals and having to figure that out. And so they try to live their best, like civilized, quote unquote, human life in the jungle. So they build themselves little houses, and they try to find objects in the jungle that they can use for to kind of approximate human things. So kind of like Gilligan's Island or Swiss Family Robinson, they try to make human things out of whatever they can find in the jungle. and they sort of try their best to approximate living like humans in the jungle. So that's, not only do we have a comic duo where you have Hector, who's kind of the brains of the group, and Herbie, who is kind of the dim-witted follower. They also have, they look physically opposite of each other, so they're a good example of comic opposites and a comic duo. But then you also have a clash of context story as well, where you have these characters who are used to being in a human world, and then they get dropped into this jungle atmosphere. So so I thought I would share that with you, since that was something that I had that is related to what we're doing, and I don't know that I have shared much of my work with you guys. So so yeah, so that is all I have for today. Let me just make sure I'm not missing any questions or anything in the chat here. Catch and release. That's what I was thinking, Scott, but I there's another name for. I'll look it up and I'll come back with it next week. Excellent. Yeah, so that's all I have for this week, and I appreciate everybody coming out, and we'll see you next Thursday for some more comedy stuff.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.